Well, I see you're back for the second week of Growing Older with Gusto. I was just reading something this week that I didn't get to put into the slides, but it's talking about the same thing that I have in the past, which is we're always growing older every day since the day we were born. But aging is a different process. Aging is a concept of deterioration or degeneration, and we're not doing that. Anyway, so welcome back to week 2. Your assignment for this past week, if you found it, was to write out anything that you had questions about from our talk last week, and I will respond to those. I probably will respond individually to you, unless there's something that I think might be of importance to those of you who didn't write anything. So this week, we're going to discuss self-esteem and self-image. Now, what's the difference between those two? Well, it's pretty simple in that self-esteem is more internal. It's the way that you look at and view your own worth and your ability. While self-image is more external. It's like, how do I think I look? What do I think others see when they look at me? And so it's that image that we have of ourselves. So let's look at self-esteem first. The Oxford English Dictionary said that self-esteem is confidence in one's own worth or abilities. I think most of us, well, I know I have had to work at some of that. There were times when I felt like I didn't have any worth whatsoever, or I knew I had a lot of ability, but worth, that was something different. Lack of self-esteem is often the result of no longer having a career, for instance, or a job to go to, or after you've been fired, or after a job doesn't pan out for you. There are a lot of reasons why you might develop a lack of self-esteem. But our identity somehow becomes wrapped up in our careers or what we do in our life. Not only careers, but who we are. I'm a parent, or I'm a grandmother, or I'm a grandfather, or I fix things, I'm a plumber, whatever. But our identity becomes wrapped up in those things that we do. So if I ask you, who are you? Chances are you're going to begin by telling me what you do, what your job or what your career is. If I'm not a teacher, then what am I? If I'm not a doctor, then who am I? If I'm not an electrician, a mother or father, a musician, a dentist, a student, or whatever, then who am I really? I've lost all identity if I can't claim to be one of those. For the first 6 months of my retirement, I felt totally without purpose or identity. And I've read that other people have the same problem sometimes when they first retire. My kids kept saying, "Mom, you're going to love it." And 6 months later, I said, I still haven't figured out why I love it or why I'm supposed to love it. My self-esteem actually was in the gutter. My gusto had evaporated without warning. But maybe our gusto sometimes needs to take a break, even as we fight against it. But we can't let our gusto stay gone too long. Now, if someone asks me, "Who are you?" I might say, "I'm an author," or that I design e-courses in order to share some of my knowledge or experience with others. Old habits of needing an identity die hard. We seem to need something tangible to give us worth. So how about most other retired persons? Where do they get their identity? Think about that the next time you talk with an older person that you know who perhaps is recently retired, and ask them who they are. If I could ask you to raise your hands to see if you tend to say what you do first rather than who you really are, I suspect most of you would have your hands up. So how do you think this feeling affects those of us who are over 60 or so? Where does it come from, this lack of connection with friends or coworkers? How can you help the older people in your life regain that sense of loss? Once we have lost that tenuous identity, it becomes easier to think that we're just like all the sad and lonely older folks we see. But often we don't see them on the streets because they mostly don't go out in public. Too often we tend to develop negative stereotypes of people who don't have a job or a career, don't we? What are they worth? Who are they really if they're not working? Sometimes our self-esteem shows in how we dress. Think about some of the older people that you know or see, and how do they dress? Perhaps someone with gusto dresses outrageously, and who cares? I'm not saying that the way we dress indicates our gusto, but often it's just another outward expression of what we feel inside about ourselves. Sometimes when I don't feel very much gusto in my life, I might slop around in an old sweatshirt and sweatpants. But normally I think I can't do that. I'm an old hippie. Maybe those of us who fit that category are more likely to have a better self-image than someone who is recently retired from a job that had very strict dress codes. As an old hippie, I tend to wear bold and unusual earrings, mostly big dangly ones. But if I go without my earrings, I think I'm undressed. And someone is almost always sure to notice when I forget to put them on. I was in class one day and I said, "Does anybody notice anything different about me today?" One young woman in the back of the classroom said, "Yeah, you only have on 2 earrings. I happen to have 2 piercings up the side of this ear, and then I have 2 piercings here, and often I would wear an ear cuff in addition, so I might have 3, 4, 5 earrings on, and I had forgotten to put anything on except just the 2 little ones that were pierced up my side of my ears." So one way of maintaining a strong self-esteem is to remain as independent as possible. My personal gusto does not allow me to need caretaking or to be taken care of or to be pampered. I might add that the 104-year-old I referred to last week was still driving her car. That would be something that would take away some of my self-esteem the minute they take away my license. Having our own mobility is another element that contributes to our self-esteem. But in order to keep someone else from taking away my license to drive, I do everything I can to stay vigilant. I try to be conscious of what's around me at all times. I drive with confidence that I know how to handle most situations. I've driven on ice and around mountain roads, and I've driven in mud and over rocks. Several friends and I discussed the stupidity of making people over a certain age get their license renewed every 2 years. I think that Hawaii is the only state that requires it. And yet, statistics will show that we are safer drivers than teenagers because we know what to expect. We know how to react in most situations that we're going to come across. We've been driving a long time. There are other indications of remaining independent that help to keep our self-esteem high. We can have fun with friends, but it's also important to know how to have fun all by yourself. It helps that I'm an extreme introvert, but even extroverts can learn to enjoy themselves without having to be entertained or have a lot of people around. I'm one of those rare birds who loved being forced to stay home during the heaviest siege of COVID. Keeping your gusto as you grow older requires that you continue your same quality of life no matter how old you grow. Have you ever wondered about the quality of life someone has who is my age or older? Part of it is just simply being excited by the life around us. It's so easy to live with gusto if you see the beauty everything around you. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Dylan Thomas, but the opening of his play, Under Milkwood, pulls us into his story of a day in the life of those who lived in this small Welsh seaside village. And the village name was Lawrygub. Now, read that backwards. Bugger all. Thomas is reported to have commented that Under Milkwood was developed in response to the atomic bombing of Hiroshima as a way of reasserting the evidence that there is beauty in the world. It's also thought that his play was his response both to the Nazi concentration camps and to the internment camps that had been created around Britain during World War II, and that information came to me from Wikipedia. So Gusto is not only seeing the beauty of life, but it's also taking part in the life around you. It means going to plays, or maybe acting in plays, going to concerts, or playing in concerts, movies, the latest and the best, joining a community chorus. I've always been a singer, and so I recently just joined our Kona Choral Society and met for the second time this week. I really, really enjoy singing, and I go home excited. Or playing in the community band. I no longer have a French horn, but I used to play French horn in a community band when I lived in the Phoenix area. Or maybe even taking up a musical instrument if you've never played one before. I've known people to take up saxophone or to learn the piano again, or if once they were learning when they were little and they just came back and started up with it again. Some people like to learn a new language. Maybe they'll join a class or they'll just do it on their own online. There are several programs that are free where you can learn a whole new language. All of that is good for helping your self-esteem. So now let's look at self-image. And again, the Oxford English Dictionary says it's the idea you have of your appearance, your abilities, and your personality. So let's take a look at self-image. That's a big one for me. Even when I think I'm nicely dressed, I've been referred to as an old hippie. But I carry that description with pride. And just what is your definition of an old hippie? Do hippies live longer than anyone else? If so, why do you think that is? And here's an interesting question. Do you think you can tell a person's age by how they dress if you didn't see their face or their white hair? What distinguishes it for you? I wish I could hear some of your answers, and so you might answer that question in this week's assignment box. There was a time when older people dressed, quote, old. We may not be able to describe it, but we know it when we see it. I think of an old, tasteless house dress, kind of slopping around in old house slippers. That's the image that I get. Perhaps there's an evolution, too, in how we dress. Teens may dress a certain way because it's popular. Does TikTok tell them how to dress? So often, teens dress to be different from others. And yet, after all, they all tend to end up just looking alike. I remember when a certain hairstyle was very popular, and young girls would wear their hair that way, and they all wanted to be looking different, and they all ended up looking exactly the same. So my own dress evolution started with high school, somewhere between the years of 1948 and 1952 when I graduated. Our, quote, uniform was rolled up jeans with a man's white shirt and the collar turned up. Always. You wouldn't dare wear your collar turned down. Then I went off to Mississippi to college, and the dress was different there, partly because of the difference between a northern high school and a southern college with all the southern bells. Within a few years, I was married and a mother. Circle skirts with crinolines underneath were the big rage. One high school girl babysitter saw one in my closet and said in horror, "You still wear those?" I asked her what she meant by that, and her attitude and response indicated that, well, now that I was a married woman and a mother, I shouldn't dress that way. After about 20 years of marriage and 4 children, I never quite figured out what my self-image was or should be. But as a single woman again in the early 70s, I began to dress the way I wanted to dress again. Not as a society doctor's wife, but the way I'd been as a child, and now again as a hippie. My mother used to make clothes for me when I was a child made of Indian bedspreads, long before they were the rage in the late 60s to early 70s, the so-called hippie era. I guess my mother had been a hippie at heart too, and I know she was. When I bought a 37-foot sailboat to live on as my home in the late 70s, my dress changed again and became either a wraparound skirt with a t-shirt or jeans and a turtleneck sweater, mostly the jeans and sweater. When I finally moved off the boat and became a pastor, I knew I had to learn to dress more appropriately. But people still called me an old hippie even when I thought I looked nice. Then when I retired from ministry and became a college teacher, I felt like I needed to change my style again, change my self-image. Now I've retired from everything, and although I'm an author and still a teacher, I'm not really in the public eye as much as I have been in the past. I suppose I'm still an old hippie because I hate getting all dressed up, except occasionally. I much prefer wearing something very simple without having to think about it. And I still love big, dangly earrings. So, what is your self-image? Do you have an image you like to portray to others? Is that an image in accordance with how you see yourself? I don't think I could have a corporate image today, no matter how much I tried. Besides how we dress or what we wear, what else fits into your self-image? Is it the way we wear our hair? The way we talk? Perhaps it's the way we walk. Do we see ourselves as always needing to be a host or a hostess? Do we see ourselves as always needing to be in charge? Is our self-image tied up in our career or in being a parent? I know this, that my self-esteem is closely tied to my self-image. When I think I'm being someone I'm really not, then my self-esteem suffers. Anytime we try to be someone we truly are not, how much damage does our self-esteem experience? To me, as I live with gusto into my 90s, which is where I'll be in less than 2 years, it's dressing and acting for who I truly am. And that isn't always as a pastor or a professor or anything else I've ever been. It's not worrying about what's correct or appropriate for my age, whatever that may be. It's being true to myself. That takes gusto. That is living with gusto. It takes living outside the box that everyone else has built for you. And the earlier in your life that you figure out what that is, the better off you'll be. This week, I'd ask you to try to get a handle on both your self-esteem and your self-image. Write about it and put it in the assignment box. I'd like to know that part of who you are, not just as a student of this course, but as a unique human being. I want to know how self-image and self-esteem connect in your life. And next week, we're going to talk about sex and your sexuality. A hooey ho.